Hey freaks, it's JJ, welcome back to my channel. Today I am covering part 2 of the Parallax story, full title being Parallax 2, Future Sequences by Between the Buried and Me, which was released in 2012. So if you haven't watched my other video of part 1 of the Parallax story, then I suggest you go watch that before watching this one, otherwise you're going to be incredibly lost in this extremely confusing story. So yeah, go watch that video if you haven't. Also, if you didn't watch my other video, then you might be confused as to why some of the tracks off of this album are not covered in this video, and that's because I included them in my other video in part 1 just to keep with the canon of the story, and because it flashes back and forth a lot and it gets really confusing. So I tried to simplify it a little bit, which may have ended up making it a little bit more complicated. But anyway. Yeah, so not all of the songs on this album are in this video. Some of them I covered a little bit earlier on in my previous video because they take place before the events of this story, or this part of the story. So a lot of the story explanation will come from the Future Sequences book that Between the Buried and Me worked on with Merch Limited and released in, I think, 2013. So a lot of my explanation will be referenced off that, but there's also a lot of holes to fill in, so some of the things I just kind of assumed from the lyrics and just kind of got creative with. So in case you're wondering, I will also link that Reddit feed that has the story explanation all typed out in it if you want to read it as well. Anyway, yeah, let's get started. So this starts off with track 2, actually. Track 1 being just kind of a flash forward to the end of the story, which I'm not going to give away the end of just yet. So we're starting with track 2, which is Astral Body. And so we last left off, if you remember, with Prospect 2 just kind of realizing that his home planet is gone and being really lost and confused as to what to do next. And so he begins to go a little bit insane, and he begins to kind of astral project and try and figure out the answers about himself and his situation, and kind of what to do next. And he's also perhaps exploring the revelation of these memories of him of being with the Night Owls, and he, might be realizing that he was a part of this discussion to end the world, and kind of, he had forgotten about it up until now. And so he's dealing with that, and he also begins having kind of a hard time discerning reality from dreams, and he's, like questioning whether or not he really was with the Night Owls, if those memories are real or made up, and he begins talking to his hands, which then in turn also talk back to him without him realizing that it's actually just a part of a dream. We then get to Lay Your Ghost to Rest, and Prospect 2 is just kind of really trying to decide what to do with his life. He feels guilty about the way that he left things with his wife, and that being the secret government that hired him to do the soul seed planting on this moon planet basically told him that this was like a top secret mission and that he could not tell anyone about what he was doing, not even his wife. And so he didn't tell his wife what he was doing or where he was going. He just kind of abandoned her. The only thing he did was write her a letter, which he doesn't even know if she received or not. And so he's feeling guilty about leaving without ever saying goodbye to her, or giving her any kind of answers. And he begins kind of just cutting away this like pseudo God complex that he was starting to feel while he was lording over these soul seed things while he was doing the mission. And he begins to kind of question the morality of the mission that he's been working on, which he did, and he no longer sees himself as like a god over these souls. He considers like ending his own life, but he's not quite sure what to do. He decides he's going to go back to the moon planet, and when he gets there, he'll decide whether or not he wants to end his own life or to continue living, but he's not quite sure yet. Next up we have Autumn, which is just an instrumental track, and I think this is Prospect 2's journey back to the moon planet, and I think this track is just kind of exploring how his conscience is heavy with his regrets and, kind of this feeling of existential dread. Next up we have Extremophile Elite, and here we finally get back to Prospect 1. So if you remember, Prospect 1 had landed on Reality B, which is the parallel universe that looks a lot like his home universe and his home planet, but in this universe none of his family members or friends exist. And so he then tried to dimension hop back to his homeworld, but he accidentally ended up on this version of the moon planet within another dimension. So Prospect 1 is just really trying to figure out where he is, what's going on. The world he now is inhabiting is really desolate, and it's all very, very loud because there's these machines that are going 24/7 to basically prepare for the colonization of the planet. And so he kind of just sticks his head literally into the dirt to try and get away from it all. And the noise finally stops once he sticks his head in the dirt, and while he's in the dark there, he begins getting glimpses of something strange. And in his dream, there's like this other mind, this other person in a different reality than his own, and he feels very connected with this other person or this other being, and he realizes that that person is himself, which gets super confusing, but he kind of like absorbs himself into this new identity. It's sort of like when you are dreaming and you are someone else in your dream, where at the time it doesn't really feel like anything strange, it's just you're someone else in your dream than you are normally. So then his head gets pulled out from the dirt, and he stares up at himself, but not himself, the himself of the version that he became while he was in a dream. So super confusing, I know. But meanwhile, Prospect 2 then returns to the moon planet in his reality B universe, and he sees something weird going on near one of the machines. And so he goes over to it to investigate, and he finds this man with his head buried in the dirt. And so he digs the man out, and he finds that the man is dead, but under his head there is a note, and Prospect 2 opens it, and he realizes that it is the note that he left his wife. And then he wakes up from a dream. So, yeah, that is the weird mind connection that we're gonna be elaborating on here in a minute, but this is kind of how these two minds are sort of connecting to each other and meeting each other for the first time. But they don't actually meet each other until this next track, which is the title track of the album called Parallax. And here is where the word parallax kind of comes into play. And basically, if I'm not misunderstanding this completely, parallax is like the apparent position of an object relative to the position of the viewer. So, for example, it's like if you close one eye and you try and like focus your sight and line it up with something, and then when you close your other eye and you see that it's not lined up anymore, your sight has shifted. And that's because obviously your eyes are coming from slightly different positions. So that's basically what a parallax is. And so now Prospect 1 and Prospect 2 are both on moon planets, but in separate universes. But because they both have experienced, similar loss and similar pain, and because they both have this special ability, their minds and the worlds both begin to converge. And again, using like the eyesight as an example in how you see things slightly differently between, one eye to the next, and then ask the question, like, why is it that we don't just see things like through two separate windows of sight? Like I think some animals do, I believe. I don't know. But, why is it that we're not just seeing two separate visions of sight? And I know the real answer is like something to do with your brain and like science stuff, but the way that I'm going to explain it for this metaphor to work is basically, your eyesights kind of overlap with each other and create one picture instead of two different ones. That may or may not be the actual scientific explanation of why we don't see separate windows of sight. But anyway, this overlap of sight, or this overlap in the story being like the parallax overlap, is how Prospect 1 and Prospect 2 come to exist in the same dimension. And so, yeah, their worlds and dimensions kind of match up through this separate but similar perspectives that they have. And they come to meet each other through their connected minds, and they discover the power that they have. And together they realize that they have a very important decision ahead of them, and that being the fate of the planet. Are you confused yet? Okay, next we get to Telos, which is track 8 on the Future Sequences album. And here I have kind of two separate theories. The first theory is that we either flash way, way forward into the future, in the timeline where, the moon planet has finally been colonized on all these like seed souls hatched, and now the planet is just full of people. And then Prospect 1 and 2 have kind of just lived on this planet for years now and all that. Or we don't flash forward in time, and Prospect 1 and 2 begin traveling to different dimensions and different worlds together and exploring, different versions of Earth through the power of their connected minds and this special ability that they have to hop dimensions. So I'm kind of a fan of the second theory, where they've been living on a second Earth, which I'm just calling Earth 2. Very creative, I know. Anyway, either way, we find that the pair are now living on an inhabited planet. And Prospect 2 has grown really bitter and developed kind of like a hatred for life and for humanity. And he seeks to just kind of wipe the slate clean by killing everyone, basically. And I think this is particularly to do with, his self-hatred over what happened to his wife. And so we then need to flash back really quickly to Reality B before Reality B was destroyed. And so back on Reality B, we learn that because of her husband abandoning her, Prospect 2's wife falls into like a very deep depression. And she never received the letter that, he wrote for her. And so she never knew, what happened to him, where he went, or why he abandoned her. And so after, some years have gone by, she decides to end her life by burning down their home together while she is still inside, and so she therefore burns alive. Okay, we now go from the flashback back to present day with Prospect 1 and 2 living on Earth 2. Prospect 2 then convinces Prospect 1 to destroy the Earth that they are inhabiting. Prospect 1 kind of like just tentatively agrees because he's kind of afraid of Prospect 2, but Prospect 1 really just plans on running away with his new lover that he's found on this new planet. Okay, are you ready for another flashback? Because we have to flash back again in the track Melting City. We go back to Reality B again before it was destroyed. Here we meet a new character who is simply called the Black Mask. And he is so he works for the same government that hired Prospect 2 to, do the soul seed planting on the moon planet and that whole secret mission thing. So the Black Mask was hired to make sure the mission was kept top secret and to make sure that Prospect 2 never told anyone about what he was doing or where he was going and all that stuff. So the Black Mask is pretty much a hitman, and he's very cold and calculating, and he does his job no matter what. And so he stole the letter that Prospect 2 wrote to his wife so that, he made sure that none of the information got out about what was going on. So years and years later, the Black Mask feels sort of just compelled to read this letter that he's held on to for all these years. And so he opens the letter and he reads this really heart-wrenching letter that Prospect 2 wrote to his wife, and upon reading it, it kind of changes him. And so the Black Mask begins to sort of like reevaluate his life, and he becomes kind of determined to deliver this letter to Prospect 2's wife. So he goes on this mission to deliver the letter, but then when he finally arrives at the wife's house, he arrives just in time to find that it has recently burned to ash with her inside. So that's our flashback sequence. Enough with flashbacks, kind of, for now. We then get to the second to final track, which is Silent Flight Parliament. And here is where Prospect 2 decides to enact his plan to destroy the world. And, meanwhile, these night owls, which are also known as the strigoforms, I guess, act as sort of like a chorus in the background, just basically saying that, nothing can stand in their way of their ultimate plan to do away with humanity. And there's, we're kind of shown in this part how actually evil these night owls are. And so quickly, I would like to just grab a track from The Great Misdirect that kind of elaborates more on this sort of evil plan of the night owls, and that is Fossil Genera, A Feed from Cloud Mountain. And this song is just kind of about how the night owls have taken over humanity and exerted kind of like a mind control / body snatcher situation where they sort of become the humans themselves. And these night owls kind of erect a new government, and they make the humans build these weapons and prepare for basically their eventual demise. So this song could possibly explain my personal theory of how, like Prospect 1 and 2 are kind of night owls themselves, and like how they are kind of birthed / awoke into these humanoid bodies and are then sent to kind of explore life as humans, more as sort of like a sick joke from the rest of the night owls, for no apparent reason really other than to just kind of torture them. And so we then go back to Silent Flight Parliament, where Prospect 2 discovers that the night owls really only using him as a pawn in their scheme of basically ending all humanity. And so he realizes this around the same time that he finds out that Prospect 1 had never actually planned on going along with the mission to destroy the world. And Prospect 2 decides that he will have to kidnap Prospect 1 if he wants him to come along on the mission with him, which he definitely wants Prospect 1 to come along on the mission with him because he wants him to see the destruction firsthand with his own eyes. So So, misery loves company, I guess. Anyway, so Prospect 2 then sneaks into Prospect 1's house one night while him and his lover are asleep, and he gasses them both and then kidnaps Prospect 1 and brings him back to the ship. And so on the ship, Prospect 2 decides to open this secret file that basically explains how he can tow an asteroid between the Earth and the Sun. So the gravity of the asteroid will then make Earth fall out of orbit and then fall too close to the Sun to the point where the planet will be scorched and everyone on the planet will burn to death, effectively ending humanity once and for all on that planet. Finally, we have Goodbye to Everything and Goodbye to Everything Reprise, which is track 1 and track 12 on this album. And basically, this is just the big ending tragic finale. So we have Prospect 2 towing the asteroid between the Sun and the Earth, and afterwards, Prospect 2 just kind of parks the ship sort of like a safe distance away to basically just watch everything unfold. Prospect 1 then wakes up just in time to watch the destruction of the planet. And so together, Prospect 1 and 2 basically just watch the world burn. So that's it for the big explanation of the Parallax story. So isolation and self-doubt are like huge parts of the experience that is explored in this album. I think the isolation that these two characters feel is what really brings them together, because they have both suffered in similar ways, basically losing their home and losing their planets and their identities and not knowing where to go from there. So the big difference between the two characters being that Prospect 1 definitely goes through what I would call more of like a hero's character arc, where Prospect 2 definitely goes through what I would call like a villain's character arc. Because Prospect 1 is, able to overcome his loss and move on and find happiness with his new lover, whereas Prospect 2 kind of becomes lost and he can't quite move on from, the destruction of his home and the death of his wife and the guilt he feels over all of that. And so I think the big takeaway that we get from this story is basically these two characters dealing with the cards that they've been dealt in life and how to either rise above the adversity or be destroyed by the hands of fate, so to speak. So, that's at least my big takeaway. I'd love to know what your guys' thoughts are. Also, I'm sure there are tons of way bigger Between the Buried and Me fans out there, and I would love to hear from you. And I would love to hear basically what your thoughts are, your explanations, and just, I don't know, random things about the album, or how certain songs make you feel or make you imagine certain scenes going on in this story. Anyway, drop all of that down in the comments. Also, if you have any other concept albums that you would like to request that I cover in a video series, also throw those down in the comments as well. And yeah, make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already, and thank you all so much for watching.